Hi, I'm Hannah Stoddart. I work for Stakeholder Forum, and we, together with the Stockholm International Water Institute, have formed a Water and Climate Coalition, which is a coalition of global members working on water and climate issues, specifically with the objective of integrating water and climate policy at a global level. So a strong focus of the coalition is working at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, where lots of negotiations are going on between member states on issues around climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, and obviously lots of finance issues there as well. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to promote water as a critical issue for both climate change, adaptation and mitigation, and we're doing that together with the coalition.
So on a day like today, on a typical day at the negotiations, what kinds of things do you do? How do you influence what's happening?
Okay, well, there are a range of ways to influence. It's obviously very important before you arrive at a negotiating session like this to have some kind of material. So whether that's a statement or a report or a paper, I would generally advocate that you have some kind of shorter statement, because the negotiators and the diplomats, the people negotiating on behalf of their countries who are here are inundated with a lot of information. So the best thing that you can do is give them a short statement that outlines your position, so they get a very brief idea very quickly of the kinds of issues that you're promoting. So partly it's making sure that negotiators have those statements so they understand your issues. That making sure that you're in a position to hand negotiators your statement will involve building relationships with particular negotiating parties. So you can, of course, you may of course already have relationships with your country, for example. Whichever country you've come from, you may know the negotiating teams from your specific country, so you may be able to go up to them at the negotiations and say, just to remind you, here's our key issues, here's our paper, please have a look at it. But if you're a good lobbyist and you're trying to have as big an impact as possible, you obviously want to start trying to influence other countries as well, not just the country that you're from. You want to try and listen and understand the agendas of other parties, other countries, and try to encourage them to raise your issues in the sessions. One of the most critical things that you can remember is that as a non-governmental organisation, as whether that's an NGO or a professional body, it basically is when you're not government, that the most critical thing is to try and get governments to take on board your messages. There may be opportunities for you as an NGO to make a statement in a session or something like that, which of course is important, but the best thing you can do is try to get governments to raise those issues on your behalf. So it's obviously sharing your issues with those governments, and then also strategically identifying, okay, which countries would be important for us to get on side. So it's never going to be that effective if you only have, say, one government in Europe or, say, one government from Latin America who is promoting your position in the negotiating sessions. Of course, you also need key governments from a range of different country negotiating blocs. So in the climate change discussions, of course, you have the European Union, you have the African group, you have something called the Environmental Integrity Group, which consists of nations like Switzerland and Monaco and a motley of other nations. You have the Umbrella Group, which consists of some of the key developed country negotiators, including the United States. So you need to be picking off certain countries from those groups to make sure that you're sharing your issues with those people. So of course that means going to some of the negotiating sessions, identifying who the key people are in those teams of people who are perhaps negotiating on the particular issues that you're interested in, and trying to establish contact with those people. So that's a very kind of whistle-stop tour of some of the more informal lobbying. And of course, what's very important to remember is that once you've established who the person is who you need to talk to, you don't necessarily always need to be in a session, sitting at the back of a room in a meeting, following everything precisely, because you'll find that there are a lot of issues that repeat themselves in the conversations. You don't need to be at every single negotiating session. One of the best places you can be, to a certain extent, is probably in the coffee bar or in some of the communal areas where governments will go from meeting to meeting, or may well be meeting up with other members of their country delegations. So just sort of sitting around and keeping an eye out for people who are passing is a very good way of capturing people, and quickly asking someone if they wouldn't mind speaking to you for 5 minutes or something like that. So that's very important to recognise, that the informal spaces in the negotiations are as important as the formal ones. So that's more the sort of lobbying process. Not necessarily a typical day, but one of the activities that you might engage with throughout sort of a 2-week process is perhaps organising an event on behalf of your lobby group or your coalition or your organisation. So, for example, the Water and Climate Coalition organised a water day yesterday, which was a full day of activities, presentations, dialogue, discussion on water-related issues. And we specifically framed that day around water in relation to the 4 pillars of the Bali Action Plan. So those are the 4 main areas that are being negotiated in the climate change talks. So that's adaptation, mitigation, tech transfer and finance. So we kind of orientated our day around that. So that was a full day. And then this evening, for example, we had a side event. So it's normally reasonably standard practice for an organisation to organise a side event at some point during a negotiating session to share with negotiators, NGOs, UN agencies, to share with many people present what their key issues are. So those are just some of the kinds of things that you can be involved in.